James Blake, Playing Robots into Heaven album review. Let's chat about it. Hey friends, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning. Here tonight to chat about this latest album from Mr. James Blake, UK-based singer, songwriter, and if I haven't gotten this across enough in my reviews of his over the years, just one of my all-time favorite vocalists. I mean, when James is on point, his voice absolutely melts me. And I've been a fan of his since, God, the early recordings, like his very electronically tinged EPs that he was putting out for years and getting a lot of hype, as well as his self-titled debut album, which is this post-dubstep sort of exploration of love in the electronic age, and it is just as good as people crack it up to be. It's awesome. I also really did love his Overgrown album that came up shortly after. I thought the singles on this album are just some of his best singles he's ever put out, and albeit a very more straightforward album for James, I think his confidence and his performances here just make the thing come together so immaculate. Now, shortly after, he put out The Color in Anything, and I like it. There's a lot of great stuff on this album. A lot of the times, James sounds like he's singing to us from another dimension, just, you know, coming through the electronic feedback of this album. But my issue was it was also an hour and 16 minutes long, and I felt like it could get trimmed down at the end of the day. And that kind of started a slow decline from my love and appreciation for James's solo stuff. His album Assumed Form that came out a few years later, it's got great moments. I mean, Barefoot in the Park with Rosalia is absolutely tear-jerkingly beautiful. Also, Mile High featuring Travis Scott and Metro Boomin is everything that it's cracked up to be, and an awesome collaboration across the board. My only issue was when this album was a little boring. It was very boring. The highs were high, but the lows were also very low. And the last time we heard from James with Friends That Break Your Heart, I thought even more in this vein. I thought the highs on this album were actually really beautiful and some of James's most personal songs, but then the lows of this album just made me feel like something was off about this album. And at the end of the day, I mean, I respect the direction that James has been going in. I mean, the guy is more, relevant in music now and getting more features than ever. But as far as his solo stuff goes, I wanted to see him take a step back. And then I heard the singles leading up to this new album. And when I say that he is not just taking a small step back, he's taking a huge step back, a refreshing step back. I mean that in every way. This album starts off with Asking to Break, and instantly, I feel like, as far as James's solo stuff goes, I feel like I'm instantly home. This is such a far cry from where he's been the last few years. This is a cold, icy, alternative R&B jam that, leans more in the electronic direction than anything, and you're going to have to get used to that because that is a lot of this album. Does that sound anything like his early material? Because it should, but this is far from fan service. At least I can't feel that way. This is far from James just going back to square one to reclaim, some of the fans that he may have lost over the years with his newer recordings. This to me sounds like James picking up this sound and re-falling in love with it. Between the subtle beat, the noisy production, and James's heavenly vocals, I'm home, baby. I've enjoyed Loading since it dropped as a single. This is the sort of very cold but really soulful single that James would have put out in his early days. His vocals sound as good as ever, and the very subtle electronic beat is just the perfect sort of contrast to his very, bluesy performance. Between the haunted samples, the icy production, and this surreal, if anything, chorus, which I'm obsessed with, I love this. Tell Me was dropped as a single literally the day before this album came out, and I have to be honest, I don't know why they were keeping it from us, because not only is it the best single that was dropped, I think it's the best track here. I have chills just thinking about the glitchy beat and the cold production here. And let me tell you, this beat actually goes pretty hard, but James, despite this, pretty icy beat and the noisy production, his vocals just blast through everything, and I love that. It picks up, it's got a big, meaty, just serious intensity to this beat. It gets genuinely, heady by the time of it that this track is over, noisy too. Do not be surprised to see this pop into my singles of the year. Fall Back is really great too. Review. This track is just so thick and atmospheric production-wise. This sounds like more Daniel Lopatin than James Blake, but I absolutely love it. This is easily one of the best deep cuts here. It's also one of the more patient tunes here. This beat really takes its time picking up with the rest of the track. It's cold, and I really love the infinite use of sampling, and I love the way that James takes a backseat and lets this track really build. And by the time he does pop in the last minute, I'm already completely enthralled. Yeah, this is awesome. He's been wonderful, takes a turn for the wonky, but it's just as interesting. I mean, to hear James just full-fledged go this experimental, this quick, my hat is off. It's a short blast of weirdo electronic soulful samples and an icy beat. It's an odd one, but for a weirdo experimental left field jam, James really pulls this off. I don't really have a lot of bad to report here. I mean, the sloppiest moment here is easily Night Sky. Now, I will point out, the second half of this album takes a turn for the more subtle, tones things down a little bit, but that's not what's eating me about this track. The beat, it's not one of my favorites here. This seems like a stretch, and it doesn't really go anywhere, even though this track has multiple movements, so to speak. Yeah, this just is not for me. Outside of that, though, I feel like a kid in the candy store right now. I've been wanting James to do this for years, and outside of that, it just seems like he just feels right at home with this album. I mean, hearing the Big Hammer single drop a few months ago, I was completely thrown off. It's a subtle, icy cold beat and a heavy use of sampling. You know the drill, but going into this single before the album dropped, I was shocked. It's got a weird groove to it, too. I don't know if I want to get up and move to this or not, but I've certainly thought about it. It almost has like a Jamie XX feel to it. Just, you know, a lot colder. Fire the Editor, as far as the vocal performance goes, look no further. This is probably James's most soulful performance here. I mean, hearing his incredibly bluesy vocals on this very minimal atmosphere, it's something to behold. It's a track that you need to sit with, but eventually a very subtle beat pops in, and James gives us one of his most human performances. If You Can Hear Me is even more stripped down. It's basically just James, his piano, and a little thin layer of feedback. Once again, we've certainly been here before, but the sincerity and the humanity behind his performance, that's what makes it work. It's one of the shortest tracks here, but it's an absolutely angelic performance, and it's a complete thought. And this album finishes off with its title track playing Robots into Heaven, and in a weird way, it lives up to its title in every aspect. It has the most mystery to it. These synths are at their most chilling. It's a very desolate backdrop. There's no beats, there's no form of human life to be seen, but it ends up being this really euphoric, electronic, just very cinematic instrumental. It's really dystopian, but it's really beautiful in a weird way. Yeah, this album very much so caught me off guard. I mean, James and I, I've loved so much of his stuff in the past, but the last few years, I felt like there was just something missing in his music. And I didn't think he was going to make this much of a departure, but clearly I'm very wrong, because this is the most electronically tinged and experimental thing that he's done in a really long time. This doesn't sound like fan service, though. This sounds like James literally falling in love with this sound all over again. And to its credit, it does a great job. I mean, the vocal performances are great. There's a highly experimental atmosphere between these songs. It's icy, it's cold, but it's also really human at the end of the days, and it's really fascinating, and I just love hearing James back in this sort of creative mindset. It makes me happy. Yeah, I'm feeling a decent 9 on this album, but let me know what you all think down below. If you liked the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, friends.